The night was thick with rain as Michael stepped into his brother Daniel's office, the metallic scent of betrayal lingering in the air. Michael said, "I trusted you, and you sold me out." His voice cracked like glass against stone, filled with rage and disbelief. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, his calm smirk slicing deeper than any blade. Daniel said, "You were weak, brother, and weakness has no place in this family." Michael's chest burned as memories of childhood loyalty crashed against the cold reality of the present moment. The betrayal was not only financial but personal, a knife driven straight into the core of his identity. Michael's fists clenched, his knuckles whitening as he struggled to contain an eruption of fury. Rain pounded against the window, thunder splitting the sky in violent rhythm with his heartbeat. He whispered, almost to himself, "You'll regret underestimating me." Daniel only smiled, unaware that this was the moment the war between brothers truly began. Michael stumbled into the street, rain soaking him, heart pounding louder than the storm. He thought of every sacrifice made for Daniel, every memory now poisoned. Michael said, "He was my brother, and he buried me alive." Neon lights reflected on the wet pavement, reminding him how fragile his world had become. People passed without caring, their umbrellas shielding them from the chaos he carried inside. Michael felt invisible, betrayed by blood, discarded like dirt. His chest ached as he wondered if his entire life had been a lie. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from rage simmering beneath the skin. He whispered into the storm, "This ends with me breaking him." The city roared around him, but his anger burned hotter than the rain. The memories clawed back, dragging Michael into a haze of childhood innocence. He recalled Daniel's laughter as they played soccer in the backyard, a bond forged in youth. Michael said, "We promised to protect each other." His voice cracked even in memory. That promise shattered, leaving only shards of bitterness. Their mother's smile, their father's guiding hand, all seemed tainted now. Michael clung to the echo of what once was, but even nostalgia had turned cruel. He whispered in thought, "The brother I loved died years ago." The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, as hope drowned beneath betrayal. Michael confronted Daniel again days later, fury brimming like a storm held too long. Michael said, "You destroyed me, but you will not break me." Daniel, calm as ever, poured himself whiskey and replied, "You already are broken." Their eyes clashed like swords, silent war raging beneath words. Michael's chest heaved with fire, but Daniel's smug composure cut deeper than steel. The office smelled of smoke, of lies, of deceit wrapped in luxury. Michael whispered, "One day, you'll choke on your own arrogance." Daniel chuckled, swirling the glass as though holding victory in his hand. That night, Michael sat alone in his small apartment, the rain's echo still haunting his thoughts. Shadows clung to the walls like silent conspirators. He whispered, "If family is poison, then I'll become the cure." His reflection in the cracked mirror showed a man transformed, broken yet alive with fire. He poured out whiskey, but left the glass untouched, a symbol of Daniel's corruption he refused to taste. His chest steadied as resolve replaced despair. Michael said, "This is not where my story ends, this is where his begins to crumble." Michael's world collapsed as Daniel's lies spread like wildfire, poisoning the family name and dragging his reputation into the gutter. Former allies turned away, their eyes filled with doubt and disgust. Michael said, "They see me through his lies, not through the truth." His words fell empty in the crowded room, where whispers grew louder with every passing second. Friends who once shook his hand now pulled away as though his touch carried disease. He saw their turned backs, their unwillingness to believe in him. Michael's voice broke as he muttered, "He stripped everything from me." The weight of betrayal pressed harder than any storm, heavier than any chain. The walls closed in around him, but in his chest, a spark of fury refused to die. Alone in the shadows of an empty cafe, Michael found himself face to face with Sarah, his childhood friend turned reluctant ally. Sarah said, "You don't look like the man I remember." Her voice carried both sorrow and hesitation. Michael lowered his eyes, shame mixing with quiet rage. He whispered, Daniel burned everything I had, but he hasn't taken what I'm willing to become. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for his, pulling back before touching. She sighed, You're walking into fire, Michael. I'm not sure I can follow. He stared at her, eyes fierce with determination. Michael said, Then stand back, but know that I will never fall again. Her silence hung heavy, torn between fear and loyalty. From the shadows of the alley outside, an older man watched, his presence hidden yet undeniable. Richard, the mentor, had seen betrayals like this before. His weathered face carried the scars of old wars. He muttered under his breath, The boy is chasing the same ghosts I once did. His cigarette ember glowed against the rain, smoke rising like memory itself. He leaned on the wall, heavy coat shielding him from the storm, but not from the weight of regret. Richard's gaze followed Michael as he walked away, seeing strength where others only saw ruin. He whispered to himself, If he chooses vengeance, he will bleed as I bled. The storm raged above, as though the heavens agreed. Back in his small apartment, Michael sat before a framed photograph of Anna, his sister who had suffered the most from Daniel's schemes. Her smile in the picture was fragile, frozen in a time before the lies destroyed her life. Michael said, Anna, I swear your pain will not be in vain. His hand brushed across the glass, trembling as though touching her once more. The room smelled of damp wood, and rain seeping through the cracks. Shadows draped over his shoulders like guilt, yet his eyes burned with renewed resolve. He whispered, You were the reason I lived then, and now you are the reason I fight. Outside, thunder rolled, echoing his promise into the night. Michael's first strike came too soon, his anger outweighing strategy. He stormed into a warehouse where Daniel's men gathered, his fists ready but his mind clouded. He shouted, You'll all answer for him. But the enforcer, towering and merciless, stepped forward. John said, You're out of your depth. The clash was brief but brutal, Michael's body hitting the concrete hard. Pain shot through his ribs, but his spirit remained unbroken. Blood smeared his lips as he spat. This isn't the end. John loomed above him, expression unreadable, before stepping back and letting him crawl away. The message was clear. Daniel was untouchable, for now. They met under the dripping awning behind the cafe, where the alley smelled of rain and old secrets. Sarah said, You look worse, but somehow more dangerous. Michael wiped blood from his lip and forced a thin smile. He said, Pain teaches faster than kindness ever did. She glanced at the street, fear ghosting across her face as tires hissed through puddles. Sarah said, If I help you, there's no turning back for me. He stepped closer, voice low and steady, armor built from resolve. Michael said, Then we both stop pretending we still live in the past. She pulled a folded envelope from her coat and paused, breathing shallow. Sarah said, These are account numbers Daniel hides behind generous smiles. He felt the weight of possibility spark beneath the bruises. Michael said, You just gave me a spine made of facts. Sirens wailed far away, like a clock counting lives. Sarah said, Win quickly, because he is already hunting you. Richard found Michael in an empty boxing gym that still hummed with ghosts. The ring ropes creaked as the old man circled, eyes mapping every bruise. Richard said, Revenge sharpens you until you cut yourself first. Michael leaned on the ropes and tasted iron at the back of his tongue. He said, He took our sister's life apart and sold the pieces like scrap. Richard's jaw tightened, an old storm waking behind his calm. Richard said, Aim for silence, not fire, and you might live to see sunrise. The heavy bag swung slowly, a metronome for grief. Michael said, I have numbers, names, and a trail of fake charities. Richard paced, boots whispering across chalk-dusted floors. Richard said, Expose his mask at the gala, and the crowd will finish the blow. Michael felt the plan thread itself through pain and purpose. He said, Then teach me where to place the knife without blood. Daniel presided over a charity gala that sparkled like a lie polished for cameras. Crystal chandeliers glowed as donors laughed into champagne. Daniel said to hope to healing and to honest work. Michael watched from a balcony shadow, bile cold and steady. He whispered, "You sell hope to launder fear." Photographers orbited Daniel, feeding on his performance. Daniel said, "Transparency is our cornerstone," while his smile carved the room into obedient shapes. Michael texted Sarah a single word, "Ready," and felt the net tighten. A giant screen cycled logos that masked fake shells like saints. Michael said, "Let the house lights fall on the rot." Applause rose like surf, and Daniel bowed as if blessed by fortune. Michael steadied his hands, choosing patience over fury for the first time. John intercepted Michael in the service corridor where the gala's glamour could not reach. Pipes rattled overhead, and the floor smelled of bleach and secrets. John said, "Walk away, and I forget we met." Michael stood his ground and leveled his gaze. He said, "You do not scare me anymore." John's shoulders were mountains carved for violence, yet his eyes flickered with thought. John said, "Mountains erode under foolish storms." Michael felt the pulse in his wrists slow instead of race. He said, "You protect a man who will feed you to wolves when it suits him." Silence tightened like wire between them. John said, "Prove he would, and the ground might shift." Michael nodded once, storing the opening like a blade wrapped in cloth. Back at the apartment, maps and ledgers covered the table like a patient on a metal slab. Michael arranged notes from Sarah beside photos of shell offices. Michael said, "We show the money moving, then cut the stage lights." Richard joined by phone, his voice gravel and compass. Richard said, "Cue the screen takeover at the speech's peak." Michael highlighted dates where donations bloomed then vanished. "What?" he said, "We tie them to fake suppliers that lead back to Daniel's trust." Sarah texted, got the admin login, and the room seemed to inhale. Michael said, "John needs proof to break his chain." He printed a document trail that would make juries lean forward. Richard said, "No heroics at the reveal, just truth like a hammer." Michael felt the plan lock into place, quiet as a trigger. Michael slipped through the lavish corridors of Daniel's mansion during a fundraiser, blending among the polished crowd. His heartbeat thudded beneath the tuxedo Sarah forced onto him. Sarah whispered, "Keep smiling, they can smell nerves." He sipped champagne he did not taste, eyes scanning for weak links. Daniel laughed loudly near the piano, charm dripping like poison over glass. Michael muttered, "He wears masks better than anyone alive." Donors applauded as Daniel shook hands, but Michael tracked the assistant guarding the server room door. Richard's voice hummed through his earpiece, steady and low. "Richard said 5 minutes inside, and we'll have proof engraved in gold." Michael adjusted his tie, every muscle pulled tight with purpose. He whispered, "Tonight, I plant the seed of his ruin." In a quiet side corridor away from the glitter, Sarah grabbed Michael's arm. Sarah said, "You're slipping too far into this obsession." He met her eyes, fire steady, voice sharp. Michael said, "If obsession builds justice, then I'll gladly drown." She shook her head, torn between fear and devotion. Sarah said, "I want to help you, but not lose myself in your war." He softened for a moment, seeing her trembling resolve. Michael said, "Walk away if you must, but don't doubt I'll finish this." The silence between them carried more weight than thunder. She whispered, "You're already walking a blade, Michael." He turned away, footsteps echoing like the toll of distant bells. Later, in a smoke-filled study lined with books, Richard sat across from Michael, pouring whiskey he did not drink. Richard said, "I hunted revenge once, and it left me hollow." Michael leaned forward, eyes fierce. He said, "I can't forgive Daniel, not when Anna's life lies in pieces." Richard sighed, rubbing the scar on his temple, a relic of his own ruin. "Richard," said, "hollow victories echo louder than triumphs." Michael looked at the maps and files scattered across the desk. He whispered, "Then let the echo shake him apart." Richard's gaze lingered with paternal sorrow. He muttered, "If you fall, I fall with you, boy." John lingered in a dark parking lot behind the gala, shadows stretching under cold lamps. He smoked silently until Michael approached. John said, "Why do you keep clawing at a mountain that buries you?" Michael answered with calm steel. Michael said, "Because mountains fall when cracks spread deep enough." John's eyes narrowed, suspicion battling with buried conscience. Michael stepped closer, voice low. Michael said, "Daniel would burn you alive if it meant saving his skin." John flicked the cigarette, sparks dancing on asphalt. John said, "Bring me proof or you'll bleed next." Michael's jaw locked, determination rising like storm waves. He whispered, "You'll have it soon enough." Michael sat in his apartment, rain tapping the cracked window as Sarah's silence echoed louder than words. His hands trembled over files that mapped Daniel's empire of lies. Michael said, "Every brick of his empire is built on blood." He marked circles over accounts that tied Daniel's charities to shell companies. His voice hardened. Michael said, "John will see the truth, and Daniel's walls will fall." Lightning lit the room in fleeting bursts, shadows slicing across his determined face. He whispered, "I will rip his mask off, even if it costs me everything." The rain hammered louder, as though the world knew a storm greater than the weather was coming. The night of the gala's second half turned into a storm inside Michael's chest, as Sarah slipped him a drive. Sarah whispered, "This isn't just Daniel's money trail, Michael." He frowned, brows tightening. Michael said, "What are you talking about?" She avoided his eyes, lips pressed tight. Sarah said, "Anna didn't just suffer because of Daniel's lies. He signed a deal that left her trapped in the accident." Michael's breath caught, the room shrinking to a single truth. His heart slammed against his ribs, grief twisting into something darker. He whispered, "He killed her." Sarah's hand trembled, voice breaking. Sarah said, "He buried the papers to keep her death quiet." Michael's world shattered again, rage sharper than steel. He muttered, "Then this is no longer justice. This is war." Backstage in the control booth, Sarah hesitated with the laptop open as code streamed across the screen. Michael stood behind her, face carved in fury. Sarah whispered, "If you press this, there's no undo." He leaned close, voice rough with grief. Michael said, "Anna deserves the truth even if it burns us." Her fingers shook over the keys, fear glistening in her eyes. Sarah said, "Daniel will destroy us before he falls." He slammed his palm on the console. Michael said, "Then let him choke trying." Richard's voice crackled in through comms. Richard said, "Careful, boy, vengeance leaves scars you can't erase." Michael's eyes blazed as he whispered, "I'm already scarred." Daniel raised his glass on stage, his voice silk and venom. Daniel said, "Tonight we honor the sacrifices of our community." His words echoed, but Michael's ears rang with fury. Michael whispered from the shadows, "You dare speak of sacrifice?" The crowd applauded as images of fake charities flashed on screens. Yet behind the veil, Sarah's hack twisted the feed. Numbers and transfers blinked across the monitors, exposing shell companies. Gasps rippled through the hall. Donors murmured, confused and shocked. Daniel froze mid-smile, his mask cracking under the spotlight. Michael whispered, "Let them see you bleed." Daniel's grip tightened on the microphone, fury burning under charm. John forced his way through the panicked crowd, eyes locked on Michael. His voice cut through the chaos. John said, "You did this." Michael stood firm, fire burning in his chest. He said, "He killed Anna, John, and you guard his throne of corpses." John froze, fists tightening, doubt flashing across his features. John said, "Show me proof, or you'll fall right here." Michael shoved the signed accident report into his chest. "I knew." John's jaw slackened as he scanned the paper. He muttered, he knew. He knew she would die. For the first time, the enforcer's strength cracked under truth. Michael whispered, "Now you choose, which side your soul stands on. Daniel retreated into a private lounge, rage cracking his perfect exterior. Michael burst in, his voice sharp as thunder. Michael said, "Your empire is ash, your lies undone." Daniel sneered, eyes glowing with venom. Daniel said, "You think exposing me makes you a hero? You're nothing but a broken shadow." Michael stepped closer, fists trembling. Michael said, "I am the shadow that devours yours." Daniel laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. Daniel said, "I built this family, I own its history." Michael whispered, "You killed Anna, and tonight the family owns you." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside, a silence filled with inevitability. Michael set the trap with trembling precision. The drive slipped into the media console of Daniel's private office. Richard's voice came steady through the calm. Richard said, "Once this plays, the whole city will know." Michael's eyes burned with fury and grief as he whispered, "Anna's ghost will finally speak." The storm outside crashed against the windows as if the world conspired with him. Sarah pressed her hand to his shoulder, her voice breaking. Sarah said, "After this there is no life waiting for you." He gave a faint smile, eyes darkened with resolve. Michael said, "There hasn't been life since the night he betrayed us." The files flickered onto the screen, truths blooming like fire through shadows. The enforcer stormed into the office, heavy footsteps echoing like gunshots. John's voice thundered. "No." John said, "You're gambling with fire, Michael." Michael stood tall, voice unwavering. Michael said, "No, I'm drowning a monster." John's eyes flicked to the screen where Daniel's crimes unraveled. For the first time, the mountain of muscle showed cracks. John said, "He used me like a dog on a leash." Michael's tone cut sharp. Michael said, "Then cut the leash before it hangs you too." Silence pounded heavier than the storm outside. John's fists tightened, then slowly fell open. He whispered, "I'll stand down." Daniel entered with fury cloaked in false calm, eyes burning as he slammed the door shut. Daniel said, "You think you've won because you exposed paper trails?" Michael stepped forward, rage shaking his voice. Michael said, "Not paper, Daniel. Blood? Anna's blood." Daniel's mask shattered, his voice a hiss. Daniel said, "She was collateral, nothing more." Michael lunged, fists flying as stormlight cracked across their faces. The clash was raw, brothers locked in a war born of betrayal. Furniture toppled, glass shattered, rage filling the air thicker than smoke. Michael shouted, "You murdered her." Daniel snarled, "She was weak." The fight dragged into the hallway, portraits falling from walls as their bodies slammed into them. Sarah screamed from behind, "Stop before you both destroy everything." Michael grappled Daniel, their breaths ragged, eyes bloodshot with hatred. Daniel spat, "You'll always be beneath me." Michael growled, "Not anymore." The storm outside howled louder, as if feeding the violence. John appeared at the end of the hall, torn between loyalty and truth. His voice cracked. John said, "Daniel, you lied to me, used me." Daniel roared, "You're nothing without me." John's fists clenched as he took a step forward. With a roar, John seized Daniel, yanking him back and pinning him to the wall. Daniel's eyes widened in shock at the betrayal. John said, "You made me your weapon, but weapons can turn." Michael staggered back, chest heaving with exhaustion and fire. He said, "Now the family sees who you really are." Daniel's voice broke into fury. Daniel said, "Without me, you are nothing." Michael stepped closer, bloodied yet unbroken. Michael whispered, "Without you, I am finally free." The storm outside reached its peak, thunder shaking the mansion as Daniel's empire collapsed in his own brother's shadow. The mansion stood silent after the storm, its walls heavy with the echoes of broken vows. Michael stared at his bruised reflection in the shattered glass, his chest rising slow with exhaustion. He whispered, "The war is over. But so am I." Shadows stretched long, carrying ghosts of every choice he made. The cost of revenge weighed heavier than the victory, yet Anna's face burned bright in his memory. He muttered, "You rest now, sister. Justice has found him." Richard found him hours later, leaning against the wall like a man emptied of breath. Richard said, "Revenge fills you, then leaves you hollow." Michael looked up with tired eyes, voice low. Michael said, "I feel both alive and buried." Richard's hand rested heavy on his shoulder, fatherly, yet stern. Richard said, "Carry scars, but don't let them chain you." The old man's eyes softened with sorrow, seeing the same wounds he once bore. Michael said, "I have nothing left, but at least I took his mask." Later, Sarah stood beside him in the empty street, dawn painting the sky pale. Her eyes carried fear and loyalty tangled together. Sarah said, "You're free now, Michael, but freedom feels heavier than chains." He exhaled, voice quiet. Michael said, "I don't know who I am without war." She touched his arm gently, trembling with worry. Sarah said, "Then start again or his shadow will own you forever." He looked toward the rising sun, its fragile light cutting through the wreckage of night. In the solitude of his apartment, Michael lit a candle beneath Anna's photograph. Daff. Her smile gazed back from the frame, untouchable yet eternal. He whispered, "I kept my word, though it cost me myself." The flame flickered, painting shadows across the cracked wall. His chest eased for the first time, grief no longer chained to silence. He muttered, "You live in every scar, every choice, every breath I have left." The candle burned steady, a fragile victory glowing against the dark. As the sun climbed higher, Michael walked alone down the quiet street, coat draped over his arm, scars hidden beneath fabric. His voice broke the silence, almost prayerful. Michael said, "Blood betrayed me, but truth set me free." The city stirred awake around him, yet his path stretched into silence. He whispered, "This is not redemption, only survival." With each step, the weight of revenge faded, leaving only the echo of a man forged by loss. The story closed not with triumph, but with a shadow walking toward uncertain light.